Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Online Office Hours presented by the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce and sponsored today by Clifton Larson and Allen, LLP. I'll be your host today. My name is Dion Harrison, and I am a Chief Diversity Officer from a company in the Fort Worth area called Elevate. At Elevate, I'm the Chief Diversity Officer, and I've also been Senior Director of Product for the company for the last 9 years. Time flies when you're having fun. But a lot of what I've done over my career in financial services, which has been a little over 20 plus years, has been focused on primarily financial inclusion, and that's kind of unintended focus for my career. But quite honestly, there are a lot of disadvantaged groups that are out there that need to be included in our financial mainstream, and not just in our financial mainstream, but also in other areas of our life as well. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the LGBTQ community and how we want to be able to create a feeling of belonging in the workplace, in our military, and how we can become better humans in order to accommodate that and to make sure that that happens, for the folks that are around us. I'm very, very pleased to have a couple of folks to join us today. Dr. Shannon Scoggins, who is a clinical psychologist for the VA Fort Worth Outpatient Clinic. She serves as a primary point of contact for transgender veterans seeking gender-affirming care, and also conducts training on this topic for her fellow staff. She also serves on the Sexual Orientation and Gender Diversity Committee and facilitates the LGBTQ clinical consultation for the entire North Texas VA healthcare system. Other areas of specialty include providing evidence-based therapies for PTSD, insomnia, panic attacks, and anxiety disorders. She's a very busy lady, and welcome, Dr. Scoggins.
Thanks, Dion. I'm glad to be here.
Also joining us today on our panel is Mr. John Ruda. John is actually the Managing Director of Strategic Planning and Analytics for Charles Schwab / TD Ameritrade. I want to make sure I get that part in there also. John helps to develop institutional long-term strategies and timely business insights in partnerships with fellow leaders, and in turn, supporting years of double-digit business growth and industry-leading net promoter scores with the RIA and advisor service segment of the wealth management industry. John also is the lead for the LGBTQ Employee Resource Group at Charles Schwab. And John, I am very pleased to have you join us today on the panel as well. So welcome.
Thanks, Dion. Happy to be here. And by the way, I'm happy to see as folks are joining, so many pronouns with people's names. I have to update my Zoom settings.
Yes, I was looking at the exact same thing, but I did not want to get too distracted because I know the moment that I try to type something, I am going to lose my entire train of thought. But listen, for those of you that are joining today, and I want you to know that today's discussion, we really want it to be an open discussion. This is a safe place for you to ask questions. It's a safe place for you to tell us what you know, what you don't know, what you might be assuming. And we have a couple of folks that have been working in this industry for quite some time and would love to help you if at all possible, or give you some resources that we may have as we kind of go through this discussion. And it's a very important discussion today. And I do want to start by giving a little bit of information to you. So as we start our discussions, we're going to take the first hour and maybe provide you with a little information, some terminology, share some experiences with you. And we're just going to talk. for about an hour or so. And then in the second half of this discussion, we want to open the floor up for any questions, any follow-ups from our audience that is joining us today, because we really would like to hear from you. If I know the Fort Worth Chamber, one of the things that we are always advocating for is open communication from all of the business leaders and professionals that are in our area. And we won't know how to help if we can't hear about what needs to be helped. So with that, I'm just going to dive right in, and I want to share a little bit of information for you. I did a little bit of research, or I extracted from a ton of research that's out there about the LGBTQ community. Back in 2017, there was a study that was done by Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. I found that about 20% of LGBTQ Americans have experienced some level of discrimination due to sexual orientation or gender identity when applying for a job. And while 22% say that they have not received equal pay or have been passed up for promotions more frequently compared to their straight employees, LGBTQ people of color have it even worse. 32% have experienced discrimination during the job application process. And these statistics indicate just how rampant discrimination is in the American workplace. Quite honestly, Congress passed the Equal Pay Act back in 1963. I don't know if everyone knows that, but that's a really long time ago. I was not born, not that old yet. But even after the Equal Pay Act was passed in 1963, in 1964, President Lyndon Johnson passed the Civil Rights Act, which at that time also included prohibition for employment discrimination based on race, sex, color, religion, and national origin. This, again, is in 1964. There were several other laws that were passed around discrimination that targeted a lot of different aspects or different prisms. In 1967, there was age discrimination. In 1972, there was several lawsuits that were filed by the EEOC because they finally had enforcement authority to enforce some of the laws that had been passed back in the 60s. And even going forward into 1990, President George Bush, he had the American Disabilities Act, which tried its best to stop people from discrimination against those that had disabilities. I'll even backtrack a little bit. In 1978, there was a Pregnancy Discrimination Act that outlawed discrimination against those that were pregnant, or and even adding to that sexual discrimination. And the reason why I'm listing all of those, and there are several others that I could go into. The reason why I want to go into those is because the reality is that we have several laws that have been passed that try to protect the LGBTQ community and others as well. However, it just seems like we got to keep going back to those laws and amending them, adding to them, creating new ones. And at the root of it is also the purpose of a diversity, equity, and inclusion program. Your direct diversity, equity, and inclusion program is really supposed to be designed to engage and encourage your employees to be good humans and to be helpful in trying to understand each other a little bit better, so that you can create the opportunity for those that may be disadvantaged in some way to speak up. And then you can make changes internally without there having to be the process of congressional acts or presidential acts, right? Because we can all self-manage. And I think today is one of those opportunities for us to learn better vocabulary, to share some experiences with each other, where we can start to do that. And again, this will be hopefully the first of many discussions. And, our esteemed panelists today are going to get into some of those experiences and share with you today. So with that, Dr. Scoggins, I'd like to start with you, if you don't mind. And I'd like to maybe start with maybe just some general terminology around the differences between sexual orientation, sexual identity, and how that vocabulary is important for our folks to know to basically kind of create that safe space in the workplace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think because there's a lot of terms that get used interchangeably that are not interchangeable, when we have a little more education about them. So one of the core ones is kind of sex and gender. We tend to use those interchangeably, but they're slightly different. For the vast majority of people on Earth, they do line up. So the sex would be whatever sex you were assigned at birth, historically based on what they saw with regards to genitalia at the time you were born. More recently, we are now finally, more blood tests and you might have genetic testing that would give you an indication based on chromosomes, but even that's not a given. I've got 2 kids. One got a blood test 3 years ago, 4 years ago. We know what his blood test said. My daughter, no blood test. It was what we saw when she was born. So, and what we saw in the anatomy scan when she was pregnant, or when I was pregnant. So I think that's really important because we put a lot of stock in this decision that was made typically at one point in time, typically on one data point. Gender is the subjective experience of who you are. So for a lot of people, that is binary. You see yourself as either male or female. And for most people, again, that's going to correlate with what you were assigned at birth. But we know increasingly so that is not the whole story. That same as no one could convince you that you are different than the gender you may identify as. If you do identify as what we call cisgender, which is when those two match, people with transgender identity tend to feel equally convicted that their gender does not match the sex that was assigned at birth, which brings in this idea of gender dysphoria. So that is that sense that who I know myself to be does not match who I was assigned to be at typically, again, at one point in time. And we are understanding that much more increasingly as time goes on. And I think one of the key points when we discuss this is that sometimes we think that if you are cisgender, you don't have a gender identity. You do, you probably just don't think about it much. It just is a fact of your life. So, it tends not to be a thing until it's a thing. And so I think that makes it really hard for cisgender people to imagine what it would be like for it to be an issue. And that's one of the core things that I know I learned throughout my training and experience with people who identify as transgender, as well as just, I think we all kind of get to that point is it's a real thing to wrap your mind around if that gender identity didn't match.
So that's actually a really interesting topic. I think that, I'd like to maybe pause and pivot to, which is this idea that we perceive certain genders or we perceive, that. And I think when we make that judgment in our head, we tend to behave in a certain way. And I know that in your line of work, specifically with the military, sometimes that translates into some bad behaviors, some good behaviors. But can you talk a little bit about what some of the experiences that you deal with on a day-to-day basis and how that kind of perception really kind of amplifies the trouble that some of your clients actually have?
Yeah, I think we definitely see gender being so interwoven into our perceptions and how we treat people, and whether we mean to or not, that there can be biases that come out with that. I know we talked about how when I am at work, I only go by Dr. Scoggins. No one is allowed to call me by my first name, not because I have a chip on my shoulder or anything. In normal life, no one would even know that. But at work, being a female, working with a lot of often males and military, so very traditional mindset, me and all of my female colleagues have learned we use that title and we adhere to it. Again, not because we're stuck up, but because Otherwise, lines get blurred. So I think when we look at things as simple as that, and the way that we tend to treat people based on gender, and we could make the argument that in recent years, gender has become an even bigger thing. We now have gender reveal parties for babies that aren't even born. Why are we so invested? Why does it matter at such a young age? But I think, I remember with again, my older kid, was not a cute baby. She knows I say this. She's horrible now. But people would always refer to her as a he. Oh, he's so cute. Look at him, because I'm not much of a pink, gender role, you can imagine. And when I would say, oh, yes, her name is this, or she does this, they would be so embarrassed and say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I didn't know. And it always struck me like, why are you so scared of this? But I think it speaks to how invested we are in this idea of gender identity and how uncomfortable it makes us when there is a mix here. And I think that's why a lot of people have the reaction to like transgender identity, or really a lot of the LGBTQ related issues, is we have some really well-worn presumptions and assumptions and biases associated with this. And we see it come out in these really seemingly minor ways. I think it speaks to why in the business setting, you've got to understand that and acknowledge it and actively work to address these things. You can't just wait for it to happen on its own.
Right. Yeah. And I think something you just said, really kind of triggered a thought from a prior discussion that you and I had, and it was related to how some of your clients talk about, I think if I'm quoting you correctly, you said they don't generally have an issue with accepting who they are. They really just have to manage how other people perceive and or treat them after they find out who they are.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say a lot of the transgender veterans that I work with, they it's not, our work may start with, let's explore your gender identity and what we're going to do about it. But we very quickly seem to move past that stage and into, oh no, now I have to tell everyone else. What are they going to do? How is that going to go? How do I, even down to the idea of how do I go to the grocery store? What if, and it's a whole polarizing issue, but the amount of mental energy that is taken up by like my transgender patients about what if I have to go to the bathroom in public? And the amount of work and investment that they put into that simple question is painful to watch. It's painful to see such, what could be minor issues be such major issues for someone.
And is it just as difficult in the military environment? I mean, because we talked about more public places, right? Which is, I think, generally understandable because you're far more exposed, right? But within the military, do they still find it to be just as challenging?
I would say far more challenging. So the military has such a storied history with how it has handled all LGBTQ issues, as you related the laws and the discrimination laws and these things. So it was illegal to serve openly in the military, to serve openly as identifying as LGBTQ until 2011. I mean, so we're talking about 10 years ago, you couldn't say it. There's a quote, and I think I shared it with you. Hold on, let me make sure I don't say it wrong, because it's such a powerful quote. When I was in the military, they gave me a medal for killing 2 men and a discharge for loving one. And we often, reflect on that quote, because I think when you look at that, so until 2011, you could not serve openly as identifying as LGBTQ. They finally repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell in 2011, but you still couldn't serve as transgender until 2016. So they lifted that in 2016, but then reinstated it in 2017. So it came right back. It finally was repealed again, April 30th of this year. So as of 6 months ago, you can serve openly as transgender. And so we see this issue of a core piece of identity having to be hidden, having to be, squashed. And any of the veterans, almost any veteran I've worked with who identifies as LGBTQ of any type, will tell me since 2011, it's a dicey path to serve openly. Rates of military sexual trauma are much higher among that group. There's a lot of, again, just ingrained ideas about what and who people should be. And there is some pretty blatant action against that at times.
So I have to ask this question then. Are there safe spaces for them to feel comfortable with serving? Does the military have resources in our communities within itself that allow them to at least find someone that they can relate with and develop kind of, because the military is also known for its camaraderie. It's known for its, leadership, and a lot of what we do in the business workplace kind of reflects a lot of the learnings that we have in logistics and organizational structure that come from the military. And so I'm curious to know, if this has been an institution that we have emulated in so many different aspects of our life, has the military made any progress with creating some safe spaces for those LGBTQ community members?
I think they're trying to. I certainly think there are efforts. I think it would depend heavily on who you ask in what circumstance, by branch, by even duty station. Sure. There's going to be a lot of variability there. VA, I reflected with that consultation group you mentioned when this was coming up and asked them, what thoughts they had, what input they had for this. And we kind of all vacillated between, well, the good news is all of VA policies are very supportive, very affirming. This is great. We're doing great. And a couple of people kind of said, well, but our policies say we're doing great. Are we doing great? And to speak to that, we do trainings constantly because we see a need, even in our setting, where the policies are all very clear and the trainings are all very clear. And yet we are in the business of working with people. And so there's no guarantees. So I think, it's kind of a practice versus outcome, policy versus practice kind of question there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it goes back to, kind of how I led into this discussion, which is there are several laws that are created here, but how do we become better humans, right? And I think that's a very good example of emphasizing that point. I'd like to pivot a little bit to John and John, allow you to kind of share a little bit about how you've approached creating some of those safe spaces for the LGBTQ community at Charles Schwab /Ameritrade.
Sure, Dion. You can just say Charles Schwab. Sorry, everyone, for the technicality there. We got acquired and we're two separate broker dealers. It's a regulatory thing.
I want to make sure I give everybody their credit, man. That's all.
So just building off of what Dr. Scoggins was saying, I think it's interesting around the idea of safe spaces and thinking about the military as an institution, and frankly, how privileged I feel being in the financial services industry. And this is a generalization, but if you look at a lot of the statistics out there, a lot of financial services industry companies are fairly progressive when it comes to LGBTQ protections and workplace inclusion. It is a really big issue for us in the workplace because, first of all, as we all know, we spend more of our life at work probably than we do even at home and elsewhere. So the experience that we're creating in the workplace is a big part of not only how we're going to be successful as a business, but frankly, if you just think about it from a human to human perspective, it's a big part of someone's life experience. So to think that you have to feel unsafe at work and that you can't be your authentic self is a challenging dilemma to be working through. At Schwab, what we've really thought of through the years is that we need people to feel that at work, they can be their true authentic self. If you're not, then, and this can take shape in various ways, but you're effectively covering. And covering is a term often leveraged with the LGBTQ plus community because the aspect of the diversity for LGBTQ plus tends to not always be visible. So someone has to actually disclose or offer up the fact that they are in fact gay, or if someone is non-binary or transgender but hasn't yet had gender affirming procedures to recognize that gender, that's essentially disclosure that you have a choice whether you make that known or not. Covering means I'm choosing not to make that known, I'm going to cover that up. And generally people do that because of fear of the baggage that other people have. So like Dr. Scoggins, you were saying, oftentimes the individual comes to accept who they are, but then they take on all the baggage of the reactions other people are going to have to that identity. And that creates, frankly, a level of exhaustion when you're having all day to just cover. If you just retrace the interactions you have on a day-to-day basis, how often things come up around the gender of your spouse or partner, or a pronoun is used, or just things that might seem small, but frankly constrain connection with colleagues and help you feel like you can be your true self. So just as an aside, for me personally, I wasn't out initially at work. One of my earlier jobs was at Merrill Lynch, and I had the benefit of one day having a reason to go into our New York City office downtown, because I was working in New Jersey at the time, and made up an excuse to my boss about why I had to work from there for the day so I could attend a Pride event that the employee resource group was hosting. And I walked into the room for that Pride event, and it was filled with just positivity and energy, like busting at the seams to accommodate everyone. And it was just this great representation of, oh, okay, I think it might be okay to just be me here, even though on a day-to-day basis, I'm not surrounded by all gay people on my team. I frankly wouldn't want to be. We wouldn't have a diverse team if that was the case. But now I can see that it's okay. And that's been a big part of why I've been involved at Schwab in our progression. So we have a few different things that we really do. First of all, we have employee resource groups. So we've had those for quite a while. We do a lot on the topic of education. So a big part of this is how do we help people understand, because even like this evening, we're all coming in here with positive intent. No one wants to create a negative experience, generally speaking, for another human being and a colleague or a friend, but we don't always necessarily know the right terms to use, and we might get it wrong. But if we assume positive intent, we can engage in the discussion and we can embrace continuous improvement. So we try to create that space and help educate other leaders and colleagues. We have an Allies 101 training that we put together around things like terminology that Dr. Scoggins walked through. We do things around visibility. So that's a big thing, is just people are looking for signs to know, is it safe or not for me to be me at Charles Schwab? So even just small things like, a lot of our colleagues and leaders are part of our employee resource groups. And we have these badges that you can put up at your desk that say, ask me about Pride Plus. And it's like a small little signal to someone who maybe is new to the company, or, visiting someone for the first time and realizing, okay, well, they're a member of the Pride Plus organization. And by the way, the Pride Plus organization, which is our LGBTQ plus ERG at Schwab, is primarily allies. It's not primarily LGBTQ plus people. It's people saying, hey, let me support this employee resource group and learn more. So I think a big part of our journey is education and visibility. And there's a lot more we can talk about as well, but I'll pause there.
No, that's all great. And I love, this idea of engaging your employees. We do this also at Elevate, and it's been a very eye-opening educational experience for us. And I think has brought a lot of enthusiasm for some of the folks that are engaged and participated. I think every time that we have an event, especially an educational event where we talk about things, we celebrated the Transgender Day of Visibility. And we had one of our employees who's transgender actually spoke very openly, honestly, and bravely about his experience at Elevate and how he was very excited about how he was treated by everyone when he had an opportunity to kind of openly talk about what he was going through, what he was feeling, and going through his change. And I love his story because he tells this about this experience where we ordered, when our company went public, we ordered jackets for everyone. And again, kind of an unintentional consequence of us doing that is we ordered jackets based off of the sexual orientation that they gave when you applied for the job. And because he applied as a woman and transitioned to a man by the time we went public, he got a woman's jacket. And he went back to our HR team and was like, hey, can I get another jacket? And they were like, oh, we only had, we ordered the exact amount and we couldn't get yours. And he said he went to his car and he bawled crying, and he called his partner, and his partner said, are you serious? This is a jacket. Like, why are you like so upset about it? But to your point, it can be very small things that kind of trigger you into a much deeper emotional experience that you've been going through, and it can bring to fruition a lot of things that are happening. So sometimes these small unintended things that people may say or it come across as being microaggressions that build up to something that is much bigger and has a much more negative impact. We're very fortunate that after spending more time with some of his colleagues at Elevate, that he got up the muster to go back and ask for the jacket again. And it was more like, yeah, of course we can give you a jacket. Who told you we couldn't give it to you? And he said he was so relieved because he said he just, someone who may have been uninformed at the time, just, had a bad response or didn't know how to respond. And then he had a much more positive experience. But he said that he only had the bravery to go back because of our LGBTQ employee resource group. And to your point, the majority of that is made up of allies, and those allies gave him the encouragement to go back and kind of talk through that situation. So good work from your team to do that. But I echo what you're saying in terms of the positive impact of the employee resource groups.
And Dion, I think that's a great story, because keep in mind too, at most organizations, same at Charles Schwab, the folks that are stepping up to lead in our employee resource groups, and we have chapters across the country in our major people centers, they're doing it beyond their normal job. They're doing it because they're passionate and they want to help. And they are often the first line of defense when someone is experiencing something, or frankly, someone just wants to double check, is it actually okay that I'm considering going through a gender transition? And how is that going to be received here? Because people don't know until they can really understand it for themselves. So I give everyone a ton of credit that steps up in roles like that, whether they're part of the LGBTQ plus community or allies, because they're doing the hard work and, as we like to say, the heart work at the same time. But the recovery is the big piece. Like, we even, from a business perspective too, there's so much of this is, first and foremost, how do you create a great environment for your employees so that they can give all the gifts that they have to the organization and feel included. And then that ultimately translates to the client experience. And we don't always get it right. I'm sure none of us expect to be perfect. We had a situation where we launched a new program at TD Ameritrade, and it wasn't like a new product per se. It was a program that you sort of like registered for and signed up for, but it had an ongoing nature to it. And the folks that launched that program had no negative intent at all. They just didn't pay attention to the fact that you had a gender selection in the application for that program, and we only had male and female. And someone tweeted us actually on Twitter saying, hey, thanks so much for launching this new program. Really excited about it. And that said, bummed that you don't have a non-binary gender option. And I love that, to be completely honest. Not that we made the mistake, but that what happened was, first of all, someone, put their hand up and said, hey, there's an opportunity to be better. And then the more affirming thing for me, for our organization, was we had it changed in 24 hours. And like, as much as I love to think that we're always nimble organizations, sometimes larger companies, it can take a little bit of time to get things done, and boom, 24 hours later it was changed, and it ended up creating a really positive experience for our clients. But more importantly, the way the program manager who launched that program reacted was like, oh my goodness, like, we need to get this changed. I hadn't realized. Thank you so much for letting me know. And that's where all the magic happens.
That's awesome, John. And I think what's just as important about that example is that you not only created a safe space at Schwab, but you've also created brave spaces for people to speak up. And I think that speaks very highly of not just the education and the emphasis that you are putting on people being more enthusiastic about kind of stepping up and leaning into some of these discussions, but it also sounds like to me, and I could be wrong, but I'd love to hear your response to this, but it sounds like your senior leadership is very actively involved in that, because I know at my company, more of our people start to get engaged when they see senior leaders actually participating in some of these organizations as well. But can you tell me whether that assumption is correct?
Spot on, Dion. So what I think is powerful about senior leadership involvement and visibility is it shows not just that being LGBTQ plus or any other aspect of diversity, because there's a lot of different elements. And frankly, like you were talking about some of your statistics, there's a lot of differences when you think about intersectionality between someone might be LGBTQ plus, but that's not their whole story. There's other aspects to who they are. And that all comes together to create a very unique intersection and a lived experience that we need to honor. So, but when we have people stepping up in senior leadership to be visible and support our employee resource groups and diversity efforts, it shows that not just is it not a problem to be LGBTQ plus or your authentic self, it's actually an asset. All of a sudden, like for me personally, ancillary benefit through the years in my career of being involved with ERGs is I got much more connected with people across the organization. I formed relationships earlier on in my career with leaders that always said yes, by the way, when we were trying to get something done. And so it's a really an encouraging experience. We also try not to always take it super seriously. I know it's a important topic, but sometimes like you have to make it a little bit more accessible. And one of our senior most leaders, we each year do a drag bingo event as part of our Pride programming. Nice. So we're fortunate to have a team member, and they also end up performing as a drag queen part-time for a charitable organization. They dress up in drag, host drag bingo. It's a family-friendly event after the workday, and it's a lot of fun. And one of our senior leaders one year for that event, the drag queen that hosts it, they sent the senior leader a drag makeup video tutorial, and the senior leader did the actual on themselves, did the makeup with their, I think, daughter helped them out or something, and did drag did drag makeup. And it's kind of a light thing, but that sends a signal to folks in the organization. And part of the reason it's important, especially for those of us in leading businesses and being involved here in Texas, is a lot of the workplace protections for LGBTQ plus vary state to state. And I moved from the New York City area to Texas, and I felt that much more invigorated about why we had to make sure we were doing the right thing at Schwab, because someone can be fired for being gay or transgender here in the state of Texas, absent local laws and regulations or workplace protections that companies individually establish. Right.
Wow. Well, I love the fact that you're making it fun because I think more businesses need to do that for sure. While discrimination is a very serious topic, and creating these safe spaces is a very serious matter for us to obtain. I think it doesn't have to be something that is laborious, right? Because being a good human is not that hard, actually. It really isn't. And I think I learned that more and more from my daughter almost every single day. There's such innocence in kids. And she has a little boy that lives behind us, who's our neighbor, and she plays with him all the time. And they do such a fantastic job with playing with each other and sharing their ideas and their interests with each other that are, sometimes gender specific. He will bring over his water gun and his play grenade, and she will bring out her dolls and her carriages. And while they're playing, she becomes the military leader who wants her baby doll to be the sergeant. And he immediately is like, okay, so are my first orders to change diapers for the babies, and they do it so willingly and so effortlessly. And it's a beautiful thing to kind of watch and see sometimes whenever they're doing that. But I think, again, it's to me, it's more reflective of the fact that behavior for humans is actually more inherent to us than what we think it is. And we just need to kind of spend time to tap into that and allow ourselves to be more educated, and also practice that muscle of being, engaged with people in a fun way so that we can learn a little bit more.
Well, I want to jump in, because something about John's story jumped out at me. It was the humility too of being willing to say, "Oh, dang, we didn't think of that," and rather than get defensive, say, "Well, the program, because I think that's a piece of feedback I get back from my patients all the time, because I will fumble pronouns. I have fumbled names before and feel terrible. And what the feedback I tend to get is, it's okay, because we know you didn't mean to, but also I could tell you. I know that I could say, excuse me, who? And my response will not be, well, it's, and I think that we underestimate how powerful that humility is, and that willingness to admit, hey, I know that I'm not going to do this right. I know that with my background, my privileges, my, demographics, I cannot match it perfectly for every other demographic I ever interact with. But what I can do is engage in a spirit of, I care about you, and I'm humble enough to understand that I don't know. So if you tell me something, I can just hear that and let that land and say, oh my gosh, I guess it doesn't matter what I meant, because I'm here engaging with you. I'm not the only person here. So if what I said didn't translate to you, half of my communication is what you got from what I communicated. So it doesn't matter. It only half matters what I meant.
Sure. Yeah, that's a fantastic point. And I think, the other aspect of what you just talked about is that that skill or that behavior can be done whether you are in a corporation that is as large as Charles Schwab, or an entity like the military, or a small business like Elevates, or even smaller, right? Every human has the capacity to do exactly what you just talked about, right? I think that's an important thing to talk about, especially amongst the folks that are on in this audience today, because what I would love for everyone to kind of walk away from this discussion with is the feeling of being empowered to do something about what's going on in your organization, right? And the power to feel like what we're discussing today is not so big that some action can't be taken. Because sometimes just an act of kindness is a really good start. Because that act of kindness can actually become something that is more systemic, more programmatic within your organization. And you can create an employee resource group, or you can create a partnership with another business leader that's in your community to give you advice, or to give you some help or some support. And I think, today is one of those days where we're trying to offer up to the Fort Worth community that there are people in this community that really want to help and want to share some experiences with you to do that. So I think, before I turn turn everything over to the audience and have some questions. Is there any advice that you all would give? And Dr. Scoggins, I'll start with you. Is there any advice that you would give to kind of a small business in the Fort Worth chamber area that you think would be helpful for them to kind of maybe take a first step, after this discussion?
Yeah, I mean, I think one piece is, oh gosh, so many things come to mind, but I think understanding what you don't know, kind of knowing what you don't know. And again, just that humility piece of saying it is okay to not understand what someone else is experiencing. And when it comes to gender identity or even sexual orientation, it's okay to just not be able to wrap your head around that and still be really respectful and kind to a person who is in a different position than yours. And I think that comes down to just the very basic of, how would it feel if someone said or asked that or said that to you? Just starting to kind of think about those basics, some of the questions that I think, we start to vacillate between, either I don't say anything and it's taboo, or I cross the line way too far in the other direction and I'm asking things I have no right to ask. And that was, something that it may be a future discussion, is how do you balance that boundary and privacy in the business setting with encouraging people to be their authentic selves? Because my line of work's easy. I get to ask everybody everything all the time because I need to know. I'm your psychologist. It's okay. Sure. But I know the business world is different, but I think it comes to at least responsibly saying, if somebody reports something to you, just give it the benefit of the doubt. And if it doesn't affect you and it doesn't affect your business, what harm is there in just approaching everything with a spirit of acceptance? Like, how will it harm you or your business to do that versus how will it harm you and your business to not?
It's a very, very good point. And I love that advice. And I did write a note that you are signing yourself up for the next session on boundaries in the workplace. John, how about you? What advice would you give? And I love that last point around, just trying to just be better engaged as humans. But is there something that you would offer up as kind of a first step for the audience today?
Yeah, the thing that was really a saving grace for me is again, TD Ameritrade and Schwab used to be two separate companies, right? So Schwab acquired TD Ameritrade back in, I think it was probably 2013 or so. That's when I stepped up with a colleague to say, hey, we didn't have an employee resource group for LGBTQ+. And frankly, I was still somewhat new to TD Ameritrade, but was having a great experience and was out at TD Ameritrade from day one because of my prior work experience. But I was thinking, gosh, we have big people centers in Texas and Nebraska and states where there aren't workplace discrimination protections. So you know what, let me pay it forward, because having an ERG was transformational for me at a prior employer. Can we do something here? I had no idea what to do. Like, I was like, because I had a couple of people say, yeah, like, do it, let's go. Like, I can help you here and there. And then all of a sudden we were doing it, but we didn't know what we were doing. And I discovered there's an organization called the Human Rights Campaign, HRC. They have an entire workplace set of resources. And the saving grace for me was they have a program called the Corporate Equality Index. And the Corporate Equality Index gives out ratings to companies. You have to essentially opt into it, that you submit a ton of information, and they essentially audit how you're doing as a company from an LGBTQ plus inclusivity standpoint. And they give out these designations called best places to work for LGBTQ plus employees. And we used the criteria for that program as a roadmap. And so we didn't have to know what we didn't know. We just had to use the resources that were around us to say, well, wait, what are the best practices around having an inclusive environment for LGBTQ plus employees? Because I only know my lived experience, and I'm one letter in LGBTQ plus. So how do we think about this more broadly? And so that's one thing I would just say. The second surprise along the way was that so many people stepped up to help once you started having the conversations. Like, people want to be part of change. And like I said, a lot of them were allies, not necessarily actual LGBTQ plus employees, which is fantastic. Yeah. And the third thing that I would just say is that depending on your role in the organization, like I did not have a lot of power or influence in the organization when we were starting the ERGs. And our head of HR actually gave me a really great tip back then. And she said, you just need to position it in a way that people can't say no to it. And honestly, assuming everyone has a bit of empathy, you can always just put out what you're trying to do in the organization. And usually that means some other group might need to do something to take action in their part of the business, but you can just pair it with, I need your help on this. And here's what we need to do, because we wouldn't want our employees to feel like they can't be included here at our organization, right? Just small little things like that make it kind of hard to say no to, even if it's going to take a little bit of disproportionate effort. And where this has come full circle, and Schwab has received a perfect score on the HRC Corporate Equality Index now for, I think, 17 years in a row, which is really impressive. And they got a head start on this versus TD Ameritrade, but it's now evolving into even how it's helping us evolve our business. And I see that Matt Bungo joined the call. One of the things that he and I were talking about is we have a whole workshop now for how we help LGBTQ plus individuals and families with unique financial planning needs and estate issues and account titles, and workshops like that. By the way, in the spirit of learning, Matt did volunteer to go through that workshop for anyone who's interested to, and just learning more about some of those realities. So feel free to chat him up in the Zoom session tonight.
That's awesome. I love your humility about saying you just didn't know what you were doing, because me too. I went through a national diversity certification, and it still doesn't equip you, right? Like to know exactly what to do for your business, right? I mean, even the Human Rights Campaign Corporate Equality Index, I reached out to them and said, hey, could Elevate be a part of that? And they were like, you're just far too small, right? And I was like kind of hurt by that. And I was like, well, I still need to be, equal to to everyone, right? I didn't even know how to express myself at that point, because I was just so like, why would you say no to me on that? But I did very much what you did, which is just kind of take the criteria and learn to use that as your roadmap, right? So I would say to those that are in the business community, don't be overwhelmed by the magnitude of what is trying to be put forward from many organizations, right? Because this is a big problem. But if you could just solve for a small part of it, if you can create a space where at least one of your employees feel comfortable with coming out, right? Or and be mindful of the fact that when coming out is not a one-time event. In fact, I have been really fortunate to have an employee of mine say to me, and actually help me understand my sister a little bit better, to say, listen, I don't have to come out just once. I have to do it like all the freaking time. Like I have to do it to my new manager. I have to do it to my new coworker. I have to do it in some way, shape, or form. I have to come out and, over and over and over again. And it's not just in the workplace. It's also in my social life. And when I go to the grocery store sometimes, or, there's a lot of different ways. And so the things that you'll learn in the workplace can translate into being a better human everywhere, right? So I would say, put that effort into solving something small and creating a safe place for your at least one employee, and then building off of that as you go forward. But utilize a lot of the resources that are out there, because there are a lot of good materials that will help kind of guide you through at least, how to get something started. I took that corporate equality index criteria, and I said, all right, I'm going to choose 3 things off of this list that I'm going to work on. And those are going to be my 3 things. And for my size of an organization, I could say I'm going to focus on those 3 things this quarter, and then I'm going to change up the next. But it allowed me to figure out where we weren't doing so great and where we are doing even better, right? And so you can build yourself into kind of an employee resource group, because guess what, everyone? No one else at your organization knows what an employee resource group is either. So you've got to teach them what it is. And I can promise you that it looks different at almost every organization that you're going to go to, because you have to build it based off of where you are, not based off of where Charles Schwab is, where the military is, or even where Elevate is. Build it off of where your organization is, and you'll be far more successful, far more fulfilled with what you're doing at your organization.
Yeah. To piggyback. Oh, sorry.
Please.
On this idea. Okay. We talk about the feel good of it. We want employees, we want people just in general to feel good. And that is wonderful. We can also look at kind of the flip side of it, that the stakes are actually a lot higher than that. Sure. We want people to feel good, but it's also very protective. We know that rates of suicide attempts are extremely elevated in some of these populations. I know among the transgender community, 40% of people who identify as transgender will attempt suicide at some point in their lives. And we know that the two biggest indicators of that happening are not feeling accepted for who they are and not having kind of a place. So when I think about it that way, I think it's so simple that if you had a child and somebody told you, hey, your child has an almost 1 in 2 chance of trying to die by suicide, but you could stop that if you did these 2 things, like, by God, wouldn't you do them? Wouldn't you make sure that you don't do the opposite of that? And so, we look at a company as such, like John was saying, it's such a huge piece of just the time of our lives. There's so much power there and it starts to border on being hokey, but like, you're literally saving lives potentially with this. I once had somebody mock some of the LGBTQ, policies and incentives and sorts of things out there. And they said, it's not like people are dying here. And I was like, I don't mean to be dramatic, but they are. I mean, this is genuinely a matter of life or death for a lot of people. Again, I think we don't think so because it's not for us. It's not for me. Sure. But we have to have the compassion and just the humanity to realize it really is that important.
And Dr. Scoggins, I love that you brought that up too, because the transgender community, even within LGBTQ+, when we talk about inclusion, the transgender colleagues at Schwab, TD Ameritrade, people that we just know out there in life have been neglected for quite a while. Like, we are now making a lot more progress on transgender concerns and the experience of our transgender friends and family. And we're still learning our way through that. Even something like the Corporate Equality Index we were talking about, that evolves each year. And in the past few years, they've been making more advancements around helping us all collectively work through that. Because again, I don't know what the lived experience is of being transgender. So I need to learn from others and hearing their stories and getting that guidance. But, years ago, we didn't have a guide to help employees and then a guide for managers around associates that are transitioning in the workplace. And that's a very challenging experience for people to go through. But there are ways, like, there's best practices and things that you can do. But one thing to make it super simple as well, just that, and this is not, official research, but just drawing from my own experience as someone who is gay in the workplace, I came out at work before I came out to my family. Like, the workplace ironically ends up often being someone's safe space. And I have a great family, like, it was a non-event, but I wasn't ready to come out to my family. And that said, a lot of what happens is, even if you can't go and execute grandiose initiatives in your organization right now, a lot of people who are otherwise thinking about covering or maybe not comfortable being themselves, worried if they're accepted, worse, thinking about should they continue to live because of what they're experiencing every day, people pay attention to what they hear. And if you just start talking about something, if you talk positively and normatively around an LGBTQ+ topic, or this event that you attended, or whatever it may be, that's going to help people in their calculus, because everyone's looking at what little things are happening, and that might open the door to a bigger conversation. So just don't underestimate the impact that you have, because so many people had such a positive impact on me with just those small things.
I 100% agree with you on all of those points. And thank you, Dr. Scoggins, for really kind of being the catalyst for this part of the discussion, because I think I neglected to kind of point out or even ask the question around really the business benefit of being more accepting, and the business benefit of creating these safe spaces so that you have people that feel comfortable with coming to work. I can personally tell you that, not only at Elevate, but other companies that I've worked for in the past have very much benefited from some very talented members of the LGBTQ community that contribute significantly to our organization. And had they not been there, we would fail miserably in quite a bit of areas, and or have missed the boat on a lot of progress that we could have had in some of our product development, in some of our technology, and so forth. So there is, and I think there is a growing workforce. Known about 20% of LGBTQ members that are entering into the workforce, and that's growing even more. But the reality is that we don't know exactly what that statistic is, because you don't register to be a part of the LGBTQ community, and you don't check a box on all of that, so that, you have to be inviting in order to attract that type of talent into your organization. And I think even from a customer perspective, the LGBTQ community has about $3.7 trillion in purchasing power. And that's a huge amount of money for any organization. And even if you kind of broke that down to a local level, if your business could add another couple 100,000 or another couple million to your bottom line, just because you're projecting that you are more inviting for the LGBTQ community, I think you should probably take a hard look at how your business is being projected to that community, and try to do something to be more reflective of that, because the purchasing power, the talent that you can have, are all bottom line benefits to every business organization. So great. We've had some great discussion today. We've covered quite a few topics. We do want to get our audience engaged, for the next few minutes of this discussion. So would love to maybe open up the floor to some discussions, and you can either put your questions in the chat, or feel free to come off mute and let us hear your voice. As folks that are advocates for DEI, one of our tenets is always that we want to hear everyone's voice. So feel free to speak up. This is a safe place for you, and would love to hear your feedback on the discussion today. I think we have a shy group.
Okay, so that's like a challenge, right, Dion? I'm one of the shyest people ever.
Yes.
Well, this is not exactly a business-related question. I tend to be out on East Lancaster fairly often every week, because I'm a strong believer in the fact that we need to connect with one another. So I try to connect with individuals who are homeless, mostly to understand if there's something they may need that is, a need that isn't being met. What's been shocking to me is how many young teenagers I have met, especially in the last probably 12 months, of young people who are not even 16 years old, who have been asked by their parents to leave home because the way they identify is not acceptable to the parents. And these young kids literally end up on the streets, being homeless. And so if we find somebody in that situation, are there strong resources in the Dallas-Fort Worth area where we could make connections on behalf of individuals?
That's a great question, Nettie. And I think there are some organizations in the DFW area that are specifically capable of kind of helping with that. I will tell you that Elevate in particular is now trying to engage with an organization called Lgbtq Saves. It's a great organization out of the Dallas area, and their founder is actually an Air Force veteran. And that organization is specifically designed to help youth that are in that very specific situation, that are facing homelessness because their families have kind of pushed them away. And they help to give them resources to get themselves back on their feet, maybe even offering up counseling between them and their families to be a mediator, to help with them, and a myriad of other different programs. Even if your organization is not equipped to manage that, there are some organizations that you can help to support that have that expertise and that have those resources, like LGBTQ Saves. And I think there are others in the community also. Dion, I think you have your hand up, and maybe you wanted to offer something to that part of the conversation too.
Hi, yes, more of a question, I think, for the specialist, Dr. Scoggins, and maybe John too. To Nettie's point, if a child's parents do not accept them, which I can't wrap my arms around that, first of all. And number two, as a parent of a teenager, how would you recommend one talk to someone else's parents, maybe, or even to another teenager? I mean, it just blows my mind. I just can't understand it. And so I wouldn't even know where to start with someone.
You want to start with that one?
Yeah, that is a loaded question. Because I think what's so tough about it is that some of these issues get crossed with ideas, and I choose my words so carefully talking about this, and because I don't want to step on anybody's toes anyway. But there are a lot of perceptions regarding things like morality that make this really dicey, because we want to be respectful of everybody involved and all beliefs involved. But it always comes down, for me personally, on many levels, do we want to be decent to other human beings? And I hope the answer is yes. No matter what other belief anybody may ever hold, that rings true, no matter what the religion, no matter what the idea, no matter what other justification may be there. And so I always tend to stay very firmly on that. If your belief system is anything, it should be to treat other people with kindness and love and grace and acceptance and decency. And so, I think what gets tough when it's like parents is, like you mentioned, we've already got a parent who has been willing to reject their own child over this issue. And often I think the only solution that's left to us is to say, I cannot get someone else's parents to accept them, but I can accept them. And I can try to be as powerful and a source of acceptance so as to mitigate that as much as possible. And one of the things I think is really amazing in circumstances like that, because I've worked with patients that have gone both ways. Their families have been accepting from day one. And when they came out in whatever form that came, their parents and family said, we love you. Oh my gosh, that's great. We don't care. Like, it's cool. We figured. And I've worked with patients who they were sure the family was not on board. The family was very openly not on board until it was their own. And then it was, you know what, we got some work to do around my own head, but I love you, I accept you, let's do this. And I've worked with plenty of patients who the family never responded well. They were fully rejected and they had to let go of that part of their life. And this is where kind of chosen family comes in. I think in the LGBTQ plus community, there is this amazingly powerful emphasis on community and on building family, no matter what the blood relations say. And I think, if you're an ally looking at a situation like that, kind of from the outside, is kind of saying, hey, I can't fix the other people because we can't fix anybody but ourselves, but I will be here and I will do whatever may be needed of me, knowing I can't fully take on that role. But, if it's a situation where it's appropriate to play that role as much as possible. But it's tough. It's painful. It's really painful to see that. This is why I love like the Pride events where they'll have parents and pastors come with signs that say, you know, hug a mom, hug a pastor, hug a, you know, whatever the role may be that may have been rejecting in other settings. I think that's so amazing.
That is good.
One other thing too, I'll just add, Dr. Scoggins, that was awesome, because I'm a big fan of the chosen family as well. I'm fortunate to have a great immediate traditional family as well as a expanded family that I've built over times. But just one other thing, going back to Nettie's question as well on the local resources, LGBTQ plus homelessness is a huge issue. And there, in addition to the organization that Dion was mentioning, on the Dallas side, an organization I've heard quite a bit about and we've done some volunteer days with is the Resource Center. And they have some youth programs as well. So again, as people are trying to explore building their chosen family, the youth programs at the Resource Center on the Dallas side could be an asset. And then on a national level, if you encounter someone who's just having a tough time, and I myself would be no expert in how to handle this, the Trevor Project is a 24/7 hotline. You can text, like someone can text them, you can call them. There's different ways to interact, but that's a resource to help youth, that, you know, LGBTQ youth get support, especially when they're in crisis.
A lot of good stuff. So yeah. I think they're going to have.
Those are great. I think we're getting a little bit of feedback. But thank you for that, John, and thank you for sharing those organizations. There's a myriad of other resources that are in the DFW area, and I think maybe Nettie, we can get together to start maybe pulling some of those together to maybe offer up as a resource. Would love to help out with getting some of those resources out there, because to your point, kids in particular are it's heart-wrenching to see kids go through that, and with homelessness being just a dynamic all of in its own that's difficult to overcome, and being a youth that is LGBTQ, I mean, it exacerbates that issue, even more. And so we have, as a community of good people, need to try to find ways to support some of those organizations. If that's your passion, if that's your enthusiasm, I think that you can, there are definitely some ways to do that. We've found ways to do it, even with our small employee resource group that we have at Elevate. Elevate is technically a small business. I mean, we still have close to 500 people. So it's a lot of people, but it's still considered technically a small business by the Department of Labor. But we find ways to try to give back to a lot of these organizations. And you'll be surprised at the impact that just a handful of people can make in the lives of a number of different people. So, Beth, I see you have your hand up, and would love to invite you to have part of this conversation too.
Good afternoon. This is Beth Watson with United Way of Tarrant County. And I am just wondering if you all have any suggestions for resources as we seek to diversify our staff. We seemingly need to first diversify our applicant pool. And so I'm wondering if you have any particular resources or references for particular websites or places to post jobs that might seek people from the LGBTQ plus community.
Beth, I can give a little bit of insight there, and this, I don't know if this will be entirely game changing, but it's what I have off the top of my head. So what's interesting about what I've seen from a talent acquisition standpoint with diverse talent is so much of it is first and foremost, what is the experience that existing employees are having, and making sure that, you make sure that you're good there on having that great inclusive experience. But then once you feel good about that and have the good stories to tell about the experience inside the organization's walls, which I imagine you're doing great things at United Way around that. We've had success with just being out in the community at visible events. So Interestingly enough, the team member that performs in drag for our gay bingo event every year during Pride came to our organization after seeing us participate in Tarrant County Pride. So not the fact that they saw us participate necessarily alone, but the fact that they saw us participate and they saw the people that were there and the turnout that we had and the enthusiasm that we had, which was frankly just a really proud moment. So being out there in the community, it's not going to necessarily, might not yield hundreds of applicants, but it might only take a few to get started. So being out there in the local community and displaying pride in a visible way is a great place to start.
Yeah, I think John hit it on the head. I mean, they're recruiting diverse talent, especially in the LGBTQ community, is something that I think we all have to become a little bit. We have to almost think a little bit differently than what we have traditionally, not because they're not present, but I think we have to be more reflective of who we are and how we're projecting, whether we're LGBTQ friendly or not. I mean, you can think about things like what's on your website that shows that support. What's in your marketing brochures whenever you are putting any material out just about the United Way in general or about your company in general, not to be specific about the United Way, but what are some of the things that you think could actually, attract that talent to your organization? It's not just the websites that you're posting your applications on. I can promise you that, because we have enough trouble just finding good talent in general sometimes, so that difficulty is always kind of be there. And the number of websites that might be out there are not necessarily the problem solver for you. I do think that you have to kind of think about some unconventional things to make sure that you're attracting those people. And John made a good point about making sure that how are your employees talking about your environment, and especially if you have employees that have openly come out, how are they talking about your company to other people, and really kind of talking about your environment, your culture, and whether they can be accepted there. I think it's a really, really big and motivating factor for people to want to come. There are some other, resources that are out there. I think the Fort Worth Chamber has some resources amongst, some of the different members. We are going to be doing some work with Fort Worth HR that I think we could probably tap some of the folks that are there to maybe ask for some additional resources there. But I will say, before you attract them, make sure that you create that environment that lets them know that they're welcome from day one, and let them know, even without knowing that they are looking at you, put something out there that says that you're supportive, and that you are a safe place for them to come and work. Anyone else want to add to that before we move to, I think Bryson has their hand up. And am I saying that right, Bryson?
Yes, you are.
Okay, great. Welcome, Bryson.
Thank you. And thank you all for doing this. This has been great. So in our firm, we're actually just really digging into getting our AERG started. Our first ones were a Black employee resource group and the LGBTQ plus resource group. And I'm very blessed to be part of the latter for sure, but I am also, sticking my hand out for the other group. But even though we're doing this across the nation, you can't ignore the fact that we are in the South, and especially for LGBTQ plus people, we run into issues, and we run into issues with both leadership people in our region, the Texas state, as well as, just general employees who don't agree with these things. So I kind of wanted to get y'all's opinion on the best way to, I guess, address that, because I definitely want to go into it with grace, of course, kind of doing that empathic. You have your beliefs, I have mine, but it is hard, and we want to be there and support all of our communities. So I just would welcome any advice for that.
Sure.
So I'll share some feedback. I did a training within our organization right before COVID, literally the week before everything fell apart. And it was a really fascinating experience. Because as I did that, we started out with, hey, we're going to be empathetic and we're going to be open and it's going to be fine. And there were about 2 people in this training of about 50 that it devolved and it became insulting. And I think the measuring of the response to the gravity of how far that is going. I think there's a point where we say, ooh, we don't say that, do we? We can't say that, and kind of be playful about it and kind of, start light. But that particular training devolved to the point that I had to call a halt to the whole thing. And I said, hey, I'm going to let you know right now, I'm not going to let you insult a group based on your own opinions that quite frankly are misguided and not based in science. And I'm going to stop you if you do it again, because it is offensive. And so I think that becomes kind of a microcosm of a lot of these sort of situations is, you start light, nobody wants a conflict. We try to joke, we try to play it off. And I think that, in an ideal world, we probably shouldn't even do that because we are talking about very serious, it's very easy for people who are not part of this community to say, let's go light, let's go easy. But I also like to acknowledge that most of us don't like conflict either. So we may want to tiptoe first. The benefit to doing that is that if the person persists, in my personal opinion, they have now opened the door to a more frank conflict. And not that I'm ever looking for one, but that if there is then that resistance, I think we start to step up the response. So like Dion mentioned, microaggressions, I think sometimes they may not be meant with intent. They may just be misguided or miseducated or just, not being aware. And so those things we can very simply say, oh, no, I worked with a colleague who was non-binary, and there was a lot of issue with people referring to them as she or him. And many of us who worked with them getting comfortable saying, Dr. So-and-so, yes, they said this, and just very subtly correcting. But there were a couple of circumstances where it got persistent enough that it had to be directly kind of confronted. Hey, I've noticed you keep referring to them as her, and that is not how they identify. We need to make sure we're using the right terminology here. The benefit to that too, I think, is that if we have that culture of humility, that if we can correct with that culture of humility, it allows people the comfort to say, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to, or I didn't, part of it is training to correct and accept correction. So that's one of the trainings that we do in VA all the time is how do you handle it if you make a mistake? And being comfortable saying, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to do that, and then moving on. But then committing to getting it right. But you're right, in this area with some of the backgrounds, it's not accidental and it's intentional. And I think it comes to that point too of like having upper leadership to have your back to say, this is not who we as a company are going to allow ourselves to be. So it's, we engage in civil discussion here, and we're going to put an end to that, because it's not just, you said something. I don't know if anybody saw the whole Twitter thread from Netflix this week. I thought it was very interestingly done that the transgender individual who cried foul, and that's a whole nother story I won't get into, but the Twitter thread came down to, I am not offended. This is the core of who I am. And you're saying that who I am is not okay. And that is not something I'm offended at. That is something that is unacceptable. And I think that distinction is one that we've got to get a little more comfortable making. This is not having a soft skin. In a lot of these cases, it's literally telling someone they shouldn't exist. They don't have the right to exist. I will not respect the fact that this person exists. That is a different level of transgression that I think it is okay when it gets to that level to address in that way. But I'm curious, because I'm not the business side. So
No, I think what you just said is very applicable. And in fact, I think there's a couple of things that I took away from that part of the conversation that are really profound. One, and John even mentioned this too, professional development for anyone that's working in DEI is actually really important. And it's not just development and understanding diversity, equity, inclusion. It's also understanding things like conflict management and other, leadership skills that are relevant to other parts of your business. So that type of professional development is kind of key. And I would encourage you to maybe even look at some of the ways that you can encourage your DEI leadership to make sure that you're taking advantage of that, any training that you might have available to you or any resources to help you with developing some of those skills. And then the second thing I think is really profound too is this. Don't forget that as you're working in DEI, don't forget that you always have kind of like, you got some muscle behind you, which is your HR department. Your HR department is really kind of your enforcement agency for any type of overt discrimination, and they will come in and they will step in, and you have to have a good partnership with them in order to help you with this. I mean, DEI is always going to deal with kind of the people side of encouraging that leadership and that consciousness of being able to treat people the right way. But as I mentioned at the very top of this discussion, there are laws that say you cannot do certain things. And so when those laws get violated, that's when, I think the velvet hammer of HR can definitely come down and help you out in those situations. John, were you going to add something to that also?
Yeah, I'll just throw onto the pile because I think this has all been great. Just a couple of experiences from when we were starting out locally in the Fort Worth area for our office here. I brought the perspective of the New York City, New Jersey perspective, and the Fort Worth chapter for our ERG around LGBTQ+ started before I moved down here. And what happened was someone had reached out to me because we had started the ERG nationally, and they said, we're ready to start a chapter in Fort Worth. I said, that's great. And then not too long thereafter, there was disappointment because they came to me and said, well, we got invited to participate in the Pride event, and we were told we're not ready for that here yet. And meaning like, it's fine that it's across the country, generally speaking, but here in Texas, we have to recognize that things are different. And so the reason I share that is that, number one, it depends who you ask. So Bryson, I would just say, if you're getting resistance from somewhere, try somewhere else, because what the very next year, not only like, we were offered to join someone in their Pride event. Rather than doing that the next year, we entered the Fort Worth Pride Parade as our own company. And in that 1 year, the only thing that changed is what doors we were knocking on, because we went to different local leaders in the Fort Worth office and said, hey, here's what happened. Like, we don't want people to feel like they can't be included, right? Because it's not even just a matter of we're not doing something. Someone was told no to something that carries a lot of weight now. And we don't want that to happen, right? And so we ended up, in the parade, our president of our business, who was a huge advocate all along, was carrying the banner in the parade and was like, no, I'm sending a message on this one. So like Dr. Scoggins said, you need to find some of those people that are going to be advocates, and the advocates are going to be a lot more powerful than the detractors. So just try door number 2, then try door number 3, and you'll get there. And also remember that the work you're doing, first of all, thank you for doing it, because you're going to have a great impact on everybody in your organization. It's about incremental progress. So, celebrate the wins along the way, because even if occasionally you encounter an obstacle, celebrate the progress, because we're all making improvements every day on this.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you all so much.
Thank you, Bryson. Catherine, I see your hand up.
my hand is up. I wanted to start by saying that I saw this come through on my email and I thought, well, that sounds interesting. And I need to thank everybody from the deepest pits of my heart for doing this, because I'm born and raised in Texas, and I will tell you, not to get political, but I don't agree with a lot of things that are happening. But then I listen in on something like this and I'm like, there are angels in Texas. and I get really excited about it. So I just wanted to make sure that those of you on the panel that are contributing to this conversation, I'm so grateful. And it's such a breath of fresh air to listen to your knowledge and your wisdom and your strategies. And I'm super grateful. I am not, okay. I'm working on, and I'm going to bring up the C word of church. I'm working on, I have a committee at church. We have a committee at church that's working on being open and affirming. This is the 5th time we have charged up this committee.
I think we lost you, Catherine. You went back on mute.
Oh, I'm sorry. Where did you lose me?
You said you're working with the community, with your church, and this is the 5th time that you've brought up this committee. Okay.
That we have activated. It's our open and affirming committee.
Mm-hmm.
And we have an event on Sunday that's like an open house to talk about microaggression and terminology and vocabulary. We have some testimonials from church members to talk about, their experience in the church as a whole versus their experience at our church. And so we think it's going to be a very, very powerful event. And somebody said a minute ago, if you meet people that are not for it, just keep looking and knock on different doors. And this has been shot down at our church several times. From what I can tell, one specific member who happens to have a very loud voice. And as we progress through getting what we would like to accomplish as a church done, this voice gets louder. And so having this moment and this opportunity to hear what you guys are saying is very energizing for me, because there are a lot of us on the committee that are pretty nervous about our open house coming up, because we don't want it to be negative. We want it to be positive. And certainly from a business perspective, being inclusive is important, but also from a church perspective, that's a different level of, trauma for a lot of people, and opportunity for a lot of people, right? And so I don't really have a question other than I just appreciate the questions that have already been asked, and the timing on this could not have been more perfect. So, Doctor, thank you. I can't remember your last name. I'm so sorry. Thank you for your insight, because it's incredibly helpful. So all of you guys on this panel are energizing me. I'm far less nervous about Sunday than I was. And so thank you for that.
That's great. I think Dr. Scoggins would be more than happy to write a very affirming letter for you, and to give you some strong words that you could give back. But Catherine, thank you for what you're doing. I think what John said earlier, in showing appreciation for everyone that's joined this call today, and the work that you're doing in this space of DEI, and trying to be more inclusive for the community that wants to participate with you and wants to be engaged with you, is really important. And I would say don't give up, because I will tell you that it's not always the first. Like I said before, the Equal Pay Act started in 1964. And then President Obama, like in 2019, had to pass another law to say, hey, for real, go ahead and pay everybody equally, okay? And there are still corporations out here that do not pay women at the same rate, right? Like, so I can tell you that, the issue that you're dealing with is not, it's not going to go away easy. But the more you keep chipping away at it in your part of the community, the better it's going to be, and the more it's going to start to resonate. And I appreciate what you're doing, and just know that you have a group of at least 30 or so people on this call that support what you're doing, and we'll show up to church with you if we need to.
I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Yeah, Catherine, to take off my, I cannot say this as a VA representative because we got a sharp line there, but personally, professionally, I have great interest in bridging into that. How do we help the church make sense of this and do this better? It's one of the great ironies to me. I'm a small town Texas girl myself. So I have great conflicts in my social and personal group with like, come on, guys, let's look a little deeper at some of these things and resonate messages and see how it makes sense. So I think it's really powerful that people are out there doing that across all these different settings, trying to do better.
Absolutely.
Catherine, I don't know if this will apply exactly, but something that might be a parallel between business and church, which seems like a strange comparison to try to make. But one of the things that I think has helped a lot of businesses, including our own, is we have core values and missions and things that we have that have existed for years. It's like not something that we renew every year. It's something that's very established. And to the extent that your church organization has one that could be something that you point to say, well, wait a minute, what we're right now, the decision to not do something on this effort is actually incongruent with this long held established set of values or mission or whatever it might be. That's something that we've pointed to as well from time to time, just to kind of make the case, because we always had a core value on the TD Ameritrade side that was simply called People Matter. And it gave us a lot of runway to make the case for things.
That's a great point, John. Here at Elevate, we did the exact same thing. We, when we started building out our employee resource groups, we started with our core value of do the right thing, and that doing the right thing is not something that you do just because somebody saw you, but you're doing the right thing because it's for the greater good of all the people that work there. And so it's one of our core values, and we've incorporated that into what we're doing on the employee resource group and in our DEI programs, which I think it's a great point to point back to that. These are all great comments and questions. Are there anyone else in the audience that would like to offer up, any feedback and or questions to the panel today? Or Catherine lost sound. I think it may be that one church member that's trying to stop you from being loud there, Catherine. Well, listen, I've really enjoyed this discussion today, and I think we want to, as a part of the West Area Board, and really I would probably say I could speak on behalf of the Fort Worth Chamber. We want to continue to engage in conversations like this with the business community, because I think it's a very fruitful discussion that we're having today about being more inclusive and allowing ourselves to learn how to do that. And to share some experiences here that I think are very helpful for one another. And I think it sounded like for Catherine, this was kind of therapeutic for her and inspiring for her, which I think is more than, worth the time and effort that we've spent in having this discussion today. And Bryson, hope that you and others can push through some of the challenges that you're having, but recognize it's not a unique challenge, but you do have a support group with the Fort Worth Chamber and with some of the resources that we have in our community. We will continue to reach out into the community and find amazing people like John and like Shannon that are willing to come and speak with you at any point in time. I think Shannon's already signed herself up for a second one. I keep saying that because I want her to do that. And I'm going to take John's smile as the fact that he wants to do it again too. But we would love your feedback, on this discussion today. And any other questions or comments that you all have, whether it's about LGBTQ community or about other communities that you feel like might be disadvantaged, any challenges that you're having in the business community right now, I think will be of interest of the Fort Worth Chamber. And we want to give you an opportunity to hear some voices that might be able to help and let you know that we're listening. So I want to thank the panel. John, you've been amazing to share your experiences at Charles Schwab, and we thank Charles Schwab for allowing you to come today and participate with us. And Dr. Scoggins, again, still your second biggest fan after your husband, and appreciate all the work that you are doing for our military service members. They are of a very honorable group of folks that continue to serve, especially those that you're talking to, because even in the face of being challenged with, being accepted and feeling like they belong, they still want to serve and protect this country and our community. And I can't tell you how appreciative I am of the work that you're doing to continue to encourage them because we need them. And we want to make sure that this community, as they transition out of the military into kind of the business world, and we give them opportunities to work in the civilian world, as it's called, that we create a safe place for them too when they land amongst us. But thank you very much. Any closing comments from you two before we leave?
I'm just going to quickly lay claim to spot number 3 in the fan list for Dr. Scoggins. My smile was about wanting to attend Dr. Scoggins' next event so I can continue my learning.
Nice. Yeah.
That's awesome.
I'm so glad this has been fun, and I'm really glad to get that peek into the business side. I joked when y'all reached out to me about this. I was like, I don't know anything about business. I can't. I'm just going to do it. So it's fascinating for me because it helps me a ton understand and help my patients, and kind of, we do a lot. And so being able to say, hey, so wherever you're working, they have an ERG. Can we look into that? Go find this. It's really fascinating to me to learn that. And then, our committee on the VA side is we're trying to do better by our employees as well. So I am secretly taking notes and jotting things down and going, I got to get back with Dr. Holly and DeGuire, make sure he knows about this. Do we have this? And so it's really, it's been hugely informative for me. So thank you guys so much.
Great. That's awesome to hear. And I think that's the whole reason why the Fort Worth Chamber wanted to put this on, because I think we recognize that there's intersectionality between the military, the corporate world, and all the different dimensions that make us who we are, right? And so by sharing some of these stories and experiences, we learned that there are other ways that we might be able to rethink, reimagine the way that we execute and the way that we behave every single day. So I'd love to continue to engage with you. And all of us really kind of take advantage of this opportunity that we have to continue to reach our community and help the business community. And for those of you that have been, listening in today, I really want to thank you. You are very brave people for coming in and sitting down and being willing to listen and to be humble about what you don't know. And I think that that's a huge part of progress for the Fort Worth, the city of Fort Worth overall, and even resonating out into Dallas. I know everybody in Fort Worth wants to fix Dallas and vice versa, right? And then we'll start working on Austin. I'm kidding. But I think it's really powerful for the community to get together and have this discussion. And even with a small group, you all have a huge influence. Your voice is very powerful. And no matter how your church colleague, gets loud, Catherine, I can promise you that your voice of reason, your voice of being expressing empathy towards others is going to be just as loud and have just as much of an impact. So keep talking about it. We encourage all of you to keep doing and following that example as well. And if you need other resources or help, please reach out to us at the Fort Worth Chamber, because we're more more than willing to assist with trying to bring topics to the forum, to this forum, for your benefit. So thank you very much for everyone attending today. Dr. Scoggins, thank you. John Ruda, thank you very much. And I will let you guys go for today.
Bye, folks. Thank you.
Thank y'all.
Thanks, everyone.